Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our first topical training webinar. Now, we normally have basic and advanced webinars for all of our labeling products once a month, and here at TechLinks we recognize there is a lot to learn about the labeling world. Because of this, we're going to be launching a series of training webinars focused on specific topics that we expect most of our current users to face. To launch this series, our first topic is creating a GS1 barcode in CODESOFT and LABELVIEW using the GS1 wizard. I took a quick peek at the stats, and it looks like roughly 60% of our users or our participants are going to be using LABELVIEW, followed by CODESOFT, and then a handful of attendees are going to be using LabelMatrix.
So as a result, I'm going to be demonstrating the GS1 wizard using LABELVIEW. I want you to keep in mind that anything that you learn through this webinar, even though I'm demonstrating it within LABELVIEW, can easily be applied to CODESOFT. They are almost identical. And for our LabelMatrix users, it's going to be a bit different, but if you like what you see, it's very easy to upgrade from LabelMatrix to either CODESOFT or LABELVIEW, and there are also built-in converters. My name is Rob Learman. I'm going to be your presenter for today. I have just over 9 years of experience here at TechLinks, and currently I am an enterprise support technician. Now, before we jump into the webinar, we need to take care of a few housekeeping items. You've probably already noticed, but all of the headsets and microphones are muted. That is done proactively on our end. When we get quite a few individuals on these webinars, the lines can get a bit cluttered. So as I said, we do mute those. It is very simple to ask a question, however. You can click on the chat icon, type in your question, and send it to our live moderator, Tony. He'll be happy to answer any of your questions. We also have a handout available to you. You can simply expand the handout section, click on the handout title, and it will begin a download. So now that we have the housekeeping items in place, let's move into our agenda for today's webinar. So we're going to be looking at what is a GS1, or what is GS1 and why is it important. So we're going to be taking a look at what is a G10, a global trade item number, and where you might get one. We are going to review the sample requirements document that was downloaded from your handout section. It's a fairly generic document. They come in all shapes and sizes, anywhere from 2 pages to 20 pages. But we're just going to pull out a few of the key pieces of information. That's what we'll use to build these barcodes. We're also going to be building a linear as well as a 2D GS1 barcode. We're going to review the formula that gets created after using the wizard. And lastly, we'll have the Q&A section at the end. All right, let's get started. So what is GS1? GS1 is a not-for-profit organization. It is dedicated to the design and implementation of global standards. So they have over 30 years of experience, and during those years they have continuously improved and improved the efficiency of supply chains globally. They do have over 100 member organizations. There's over 1 million companies doing business through 150 countries. They have over 5 billion transactions a day. Simply put, GS1 is the most widely used supply chain standard system in the world. So why is GS1 important? As I said, they are used globally. They are used across multiple sectors. They are largely unseen, but again, tremendously important. The GS1 standards ensure key processes run smoothly in some of the world's biggest industries like retail, healthcare, and transportation. So really, in a world where data is continuously growing, GS1 standards are going to help you single out what's important. So our TechLinks software products have been certified by GS1, and again, what we'll specifically be looking at in today's webinar is the wizard that will be creating a GS1 barcode. You want to keep in mind that when using the wizard, there is an importance to staying on the latest versions of the software. So if you have outdated versions of the software and requirements have since changed, or new application identifiers have been created, then the barcodes being created may not pass verification or validation. So there is more that comes into play for GS1 label creation, such as quiet zone, placement on the label, quite a few things in fact. But really the purpose of this webinar again is to is for the barcode generation using the wizard. So what is a G10? Stands for Global Trade Item Number. A G10 is used by a company to uniquely identify all of its trade items. And GS1 defines trade items as products or services that are priced, ordered, or invoiced at any point in the supply chain. G10 is going to be comprised of the company prefix. It's going to include a reference item number, and lastly, it's going to be followed by a check digit. So we have quite a few end users and resellers both ask us, you know, what is my G10 number? What G10 number should I be using? Before we can figure out, or before you can figure out what a G10 number is, what your G10 number is, you do need the GS1 company prefix. That's actually licensed by GS1, so we actually cannot provide a GS1 company prefix, and therefore we don't provide a G10 number. Your end user would need to request the GS1 company prefix from GS1. Using that GS1 company prefix, you combine it with your own trade item number, and that essentially becomes the G10. So now we're looking at the training demonstration. We're first going to pull up our handout. Should look very similar to this. And I'll also pull up our LabelView software. So this handout, as I said, is just a generic requirements document. There's quite a bit of information on here, where everything needs to be placed, what information is getting placed in different sections, things like that. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can right away see that there are 2 labels in play. There's one with 2 barcodes, one with 3 barcodes. If we scroll down a little bit further, we can view the first sample label template. Figure 3 says it's an example palette label sample for standard weight systems. Scroll down a little bit more, we'll see that figure 4 is an example palette label for catch weight systems. So we're going to be taking a look at figure 4 here, the example palette label for catch weight systems, mainly just because it has 3 barcodes. So we can go through and create 3 linear barcodes right away. So again, we're not going to be looking at all of the sections of this label template. This webinar is primarily for the creation of the barcodes. Simply put, this requirements document is saying specific information needs to be in section 1, specific information needs to be in section 2, so forth and so on. But again, just circling back to, we're going to be focusing on the barcodes. So we have 3 barcodes on this label template. And if we take a closer look, there's only a little bit of information we really need from this sample document. We need some application identifiers, and then the information followed by those application identifiers. Once we have that information, we can actually start creating our barcodes in the software using the GS1 wizard. We don't need a whole lot from this document to actually start creating the barcodes. So if we scroll down a little bit further, we're going to come to the section that refers to the lower section of that label template, lower segment. And it's telling us what application identifiers are going to be used for the first barcode. There's actually a couple in the first barcode. You can see there's application identifier 02, 15, and 37. Now, I keep saying application identifiers. Those are the numbers in between parentheses. They're really just flags that are determining the nature of the data that is coming after that application identifier. It's going to determine the data, the length, how many digits or characters, whether it's a variable or a constant, the format of the data, things like that. So just think of them as flags that, again, determine the nature of the data. So we now have the actual application identifiers that are going into the first barcode. Again, I said it's 02, which is the actual G10. We have best before, which is application identifier 15. And then we have cases per pallet, which is application identifier 37. So using that information, we can actually start using the wizard and creating our first barcode. So on the left-hand side, we're going to jump into LabelView. There's one thing I need you to do before we start launching the wizard, and that's to go to Tools, Configuration, go to the Others tab, and there's a checkbox at the very bottom that says Use GS1 norm. That's just going to ensure that all of the barcode's characteristics respect that GS1 norm. So once we have that checked, what we're actually going to do is now create variables in the software. Now, I mentioned the monthly webinars. I'm going to create a few when printed fields and a few date stamps, and those are going to be the variables that are linked into the wizard. Now, we do cover all of that, I believe, in the basic webinar. So if you do need a bit of a recap, the July webinars are coming up fairly soon. So to get started, we're going to create our G10 variable. I'm going to right-click on when printed, choose Add. It's prompting me for a name right away. I'm just going to call this G10. And for the actual value of this G10, I'm just going to use the sample data in the sample requirements document. Now, if you're pulling in from a database, you can use a database variable. But for the webinar, I'll just be using when printed fields. Okay, so I have my G10 variable created. I'm now going to create a best before. And in the description, it's stating it needs to be in format year, month, day, day. I'm going to create the last application identifier, which is cases per pallet, and that's application identifier 37. And again, just using the sample data. So I have 3 variables created. I can start creating that first barcode in the figure 4 label. So to launch the GS1 wizard, we're just going to go to Objects and Barcode, select GS1 wizard. Very top section is prompting us for a symbology. We're going to create all linear barcodes first. So we're going to keep it at GS1-128. Below that, we're selecting our application identifiers. And again, for that very first barcode, it's 02, 15, and 37. So I'm going to select 02, click Add, come down to 15. Again, click Add, and lastly, 37. So the application identifier is placed in this pool below the application identifier window. Now we're going to start linking the variables into these application identifiers. So I'm going to highlight 02. Down here it's prompting me for a data source, whether the data is going to be fixed or it's going to be variable. So I've created some when printed variables, so I'm going to link that into those when printed variables. So I'm going to switch this to variable, and the name of the variable for my first application identifier of 02 is going to be G10. 15, I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to switch this to variable and choose best before. And lastly, application identifier 37, we're going to switch this to cases per pallet. So I have everything set. I'm going to click Finish. Now what this is creating in the back end is a formula. Once I click Finish, it's going to prompt me, do I actually want to display the barcode? And then I'll click Yes. It's also going to prompt me if I do want to proceed creating the barcode, because application identifier 02 should be associated with application identifier 00. That's according to GS1. And as you can see in figure 4, we will be using application identifier 00 on that third barcode. So we'll still be meeting GS1 requirements. Now, having said that, even if we weren't creating that third barcode, we could click Yes and still create the barcode. Using this wizard, you do have the ability to create any type of barcode you want. You can use any application identifier you want. So there is a possibility that you might not be meeting GS1 standards or requirements at that point, or you might be creating a non-compliant barcode. The software is GS1 certified, yes, but it is really just a tool for you to use. And if you would like to be compliant, you can certainly meet those standards. But if you're going to be using or creating in-house barcodes, you can certainly do that as well. The software will, however, warn you when you're going to break GS1 requirements. So we're going to click Finish. Do we want to create the defined barcode? Yes, I do. Letting me know that application identifier 02 should be associated with application identifier 00. Do I still want to create it? Yes, I do. So I've created my barcode. I'm just going to stretch that out a little bit. We have the first barcode created. Place it a little bit lower on the label. And now we can start looking at the second barcode on this figure 4 label. So if we take a look, we see we have application identifiers 3402, 3202, and then 90. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. And we can see that 3402 is gross weight in pounds, 3202 is net weight in pounds, and 90 is units per case. So right away I'm going to create these variables as when printed fields. And again, for the values, I'm just using the sample data. Create the net weight in pounds. And lastly, units per case. So we're going to go through the same process using these application identifiers. So again, we're going to go to Object, Barcode, and GS1 Wizard. We're going to keep it at GS1 128. And we're going to select our application identifiers. So we're looking for 3402. Now what we'll actually be selecting is 3400 to 3409. So when I click Add, we can further specify the identifier. So we'll take that to 3402. Now we're going to take a look and try to find 3202. Same thing, we're saying 3200 to 3209, so we're going to add that and further specify the identifier. And lastly, units per case, which is 90. So we have our application identifier selected. Now we're going to link them into our variables. (3202) is going to be net weight in pounds. And lastly, 90 was units per case. Clicking Finish, do we actually want to create the barcode? Yes, we do. 3402 should be identified with 00. So we're going to click Yes there. I'll expand this a little bit so it's easier to see. And we now have our second barcode. Our last barcode, which is just 00 application identifier, down here. And we are going to add, it's not giving us an example of an SSCT 18, so it should display all 18 digits. I'll just create a variable with 18 digits. So I'm going to right-click on when printed, choose Add. We'll call this one SSCC, and put in 18 digits. All right, click OK, and we'll use our GS1 Wizard one more time. Use application identifier 00, click Add, and we will link in our SSCC. And now we have our third barcode. Now, we've strictly created linear barcodes. Had this information all been linked together as one formula, the size of the barcode would go off the label. We can also create 2D barcodes. You can compact a little bit more data, actually much more data, into a smaller area, saving a little bit of space. So we're actually going to link every single one of these application identifiers into a 2D barcode, and we'll see how much space that can take up on the label. It's the exact same process, whether you're creating a linear barcode or a 2D barcode using the wizard. So we can go to Object and Barcode. Again, choose GS1 Wizard. The main difference here is we're changing the symbology from GS1-128 to one of the 2D barcodes. So for here, we're just going to select GS1 Data Matrix. And again, we're just selecting all the same application identifiers. So we're going to start with 02, which is our GTIN. Then 15, which is our best before. 37, which is our cases per pallet. 3402. is gross weight in pounds, and then 3202 which was net weight in pounds. And then lastly 90 and then 00. Now traditionally with the 2D barcode, you don't have a human readable. Sometimes some of the newer ones have stacked human readables. Our software right now is going to create a 2D barcode with pretty long human readable. So I'm going to make this data a little bit smaller. This is how much data is actually brought into this label template. It's also all the data that's brought into this QR barcode, or I'm sorry, this is data matrix barcode. So all three of those bottom linear barcodes are linked into the human readable as well as the data matrix 2D barcode. So taking a look at the formulas that get created. If we highlight the very first barcode that we created, it's going to put a red arrow by the formula. If we highlight the second one, it will link into the second formula created, so forth and so on. Double-clicking on any one of these formulas shows us what the GS1 wizard created. So there's quite a few application identifiers in here. Some of the variables, they're all concatenated together. It's using FNC1 characters. So we do get a few customers calling us that need to have these formulas modified. And really at this point, with this kind of data that's in this formula, it is actually much easier to start from scratch using the GS1 wizard. That's how simple it is. So it's easier to just kind of delete the object that's on your label, go through the GS1 wizard one more time, and then recreate the barcode. It's easier, as I said, to recreate that barcode than it is to modify the existing formula. So I do hope that you found that demonstration helpful. To wrap up this webinar, I just want to reiterate a couple of helpful reminders, mainly GS1 barcodes versus GS1 labels. Again, GS1 barcodes are just a small part of a GS1 label. They're just one component in there. There's a number of things such as placement, quiet zone, things of that nature that go into the makeup of a GS1 label. Second point is TechLinks can help design your labels. So if you're looking for assistance in designing or redesigning any of your labels, we do have professional services to help take on some of this burden for you. So you can always visit our website at techlinks.com to learn more. It's also beneficial for you to stay on the latest versions of the software to take advantage of wizards that help you maintain compliance. If you have a subscription license or an active software maintenance agreement with TechLinks, you can always upgrade at no additional cost. Lastly, upon exiting the webinar, you're going to be prompted to provide us with feedback on this webinar. So please complete this short survey and give us your feedback on this webinar. Really, all of our webinars are going to be customer driven, so any feedback for us is good feedback. So now that we've covered these quick reminders, let's just move into our question and answer portion of the webinar. And again, this is where you're going to leverage that chat window in the webinar. So just expand chat and you can type in your questions there. So I'm just going to take a few moments, read through some of these questions submitted so far, and just give me just a moment here. One of the easier ones I can see in here is how do you create new variables in LabelView? So I'm actually going to maximize the LabelView section just so I can go over that. Just going over what I did in the software. Again, if you're creating a new when printed field, it's very simple. You're just right-clicking on when printed under the data sources, selecting add. You're giving your variable a name under the name section and an initial value here under value. So if your value is 1 through 5, you just type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now again, the webinar was primarily for the GS1 barcode creation. So if you need help with creating some standard variables in LabelView, such as database, like a database connection or date stamps or when printed fields, I'd really suggest you take a look at the monthly webinars. They are a wealth of knowledge. A couple of questions, all the same question. Is there any easy way to tell if my existing barcodes are GS1 compliant? The easiest way, quite honestly, would be to get in contact with GS1. And again, there's that question, can you actually sell me a GS1 barcode or G10? No, that is going to come through GS1. So you would first need to get the GS1 company prefix through GS1. And then you use that company prefix to create your G10s. A question popped up, can I build a GS1 barcode for my customer without a spec sheet? Quite honestly, I don't see how. Your customer would be creating, a shipping container label or some sort of some label that's being placed on merchandise. It's going to be shipped to somebody else. Whoever you're shipping these to needs those labels and barcodes to be in a very specific format. So usually you would get the requirement sheet from whoever you're shipping it to. They usually have those pretty handy. I would almost find it very impossible to create a GS1 label or barcode without a sheet like that. Question on where that GS1 norm checkbox was again. In LabelView, if you go to Tools and Configuration, you're actually going to come over to the Others tab. It's going to be the very bottom checkbox here. Question on whether you can increment a number in a 2D barcode or a number in a, can you essentially have an incrementing number? Yes, that's a very common thing to be linked into either linear or 2D barcodes. You would essentially create a counter in the software. That would actually be in the basic webinar, creation of counters. So as I was creating when printed variables, to be linked into the GS1 wizard rather than creating a one printed field right here. You would create a counter. These are pretty straightforward. You can right-click on counter, select add, give the counter a name, and this is pretty much the value set. This is going to be the starting number, how much it's going to increment by. It's never going to go outside of the min or max value range. So then you'd have either a counter or some sort of serial number created, and you can link in that serial number to your barcode. And it would be the same process for a linear and a 2D barcode. Customer was asking about the, an end user was asking about the prompt for the when printed fields. So when you go to File Print, by default, that's going to be under the Form tab. And you can simply type that data in. There are a number of questions on what is the difference between LabelView and CODESOFT. The user interface between the two is very similar. Really, CODESOFT is more to be used with our enterprise software, such as Sentinel, that automates the print process. It also links into Label Archive, which is an add-on. You can use that for creating an audit trail and creating a workflow where you would submit a label for approval. It also encrypts all the data, keeps them centralized. So it can also be linked into Central, which you can use to print via the website. So again, LabelView and CODESOFT are very similar in the user interface. However, CODESOFT is what can be linked into our enterprise software. And this is really why we used LabelView and CODESOFT. The GS1 wizard is a little bit more simpler within LabelView and CODESOFT. There's a question, can I use LabelView version 8.6 to create GS1 barcodes? Yes, you can, but I don't believe the wizard was available, so it's going to be a little bit harder. Also, GS1 continuously, I can't recall how old that version is, but I don't think all of the application identifiers are going to be available in that version. So again, the software is really a tool, and you can create either compliant or not compliant barcodes with it, but you're going to have more features available. It's going to be easier to create it in the more recent versions of the software. Again, I do not believe you're going to have enough application identifiers in the version 8.6. I do not think they're all listed in there. There's a question that popped up. Can I make a formula that goes from, looks like a serial number with dashes without manually changing it? Yes, you absolutely can. We're not really going to be going through that in this webinar. That might take us off track quite a bit. I'd recommend reaching out to our tech support. They should be able to help you with that formula creation. There's a question that popped up. What is the easiest way to wrap the human readable portion or the 2D barcode? So the current wizard, there's not an easy checkbox way to do this. We're currently looking into that, and that should be in one of the upcoming versions of our software. But right now it's going to create this straight text line. Again, that's really application identifiers and then the individual data following the application identifiers. So what we can do is we can actually create a formula that just concatenates all this information. We can put paragraph breaks in there, which brings it down to a second line. So it looks like Tony, the moderator, already answered that, but just to kind of see it in action, if you right-click on Formula and choose Add, you can create, so a quick few takeaways. Anything surrounded by quotation marks is going to be static. Everything's concatenating using the ampersand, and then variable data has no quotation marks. So again, static information surrounded by quotes. If there are no quotes, it's variable. It's all concatenated using an ampersand. So if we were going to use a static 02 application identifier, we would concatenate that with our, what was that, GTIN. If I click the test button, we can kind of see what is getting created. Now, if you needed to wrap that down to a second line, we would use a carriage return, and the formula or the expression for that is char, C-H-A-R. So you can type in another ampersand, type in C-H-A-R. You can see it finding it, and it's looking for an integer. We want to put the number 13 in there, and anything following that is going to jump down to a different line. So you just reconcatenate all the values, place that on the label as the human readable, and then whenever the barcode is updating, the human readable is automatically updating at that point. So there's a question about some of the different application identifiers. Each identifier has its, as I said, essentially a flag. So anything coming after a specific application identifier needs to be in a certain format. It needs to be a certain piece of data. So 02 application identifier was a GTIN number. 15 was best before in a certain format. 48, I believe, was cases per pallet. So there's a question about the 3400 to 3409. Those all deal with weights. I don't have the sheet in front of me. They actually go up to 9,000 something or other, so I apologize, I don't have all of them memorized. But if you browse out to GS1's website, it's just gs1.org. There should be a link on there for what every single application identifier should be. Question popped up, use CODESOFT. Is this the same process? This is basically the exact same process. The wizard is going to be the same through LABELVIEW and CODESOFT. So everything we're covering in LABELVIEW here, you can easily carry that over and you do the same steps in CODESOFT. So there's a question, where do you set up the application identifiers? So you notice that I was creating variables, but you don't actually create the application identifiers. The GS1 wizard is going to add those for you. So when you are in the wizard, so if we go to Objects and Barcode and GS1 Wizard, the fact that you're selecting the application identifiers here means they're automatically going to be added to the barcode. So if I highlight 02 and click Add, come down here and give it my GTIN variable again, when I click Finish, it's actually going to automatically create the 02 application identifier, and then it will just display the GTIN after that. So we're running a little bit late on time. We're actually going to wrap up and conclude the webinar for creating GS1 labels with LabelView and CODESOFT. I want you to keep in mind that what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my monitor. We're still going to keep the line open, and we're still going to be answering questions moving forward. It's just my monitor is what I'll stop sharing. So thank you all for your time today, and don't hesitate to contact us with any further questions or needs.